Some secrets are not kept to deceive people, but to see who they truly are when they think no one is watching. I learned a long time ago that my uniform carried a heavy weight which changed how people spoke to me. When I met Preston, I decided to leave my true rank out of our early conversations. I wanted to see if he loved me for myself, or if he was just intimidated by my title. Preston knew that I was in the military, but he assumed my role was basic and administrative. I never corrected his assumption because his gentle, protective nature felt incredibly refreshing to experience. He treated me like a normal partner instead of a high-ranking decision-maker who commanded thousands of active soldiers daily. It was a beautiful, simple existence that made me believe we had a genuine future together. As our bond grew, Preston slowly developed a quiet belief that he was the more established partner in our relationship. I watched this dynamic unfold without saying a word because it did not bother me in the slightest. His confidence was charming, and I preferred observing how his character developed without the shadow of my career hanging over him. However, the true test of our dynamic was approaching much faster than I realized. One evening, Preston asked if I would accompany him to meet his parents for dinner at their estate. He explained that his family was eager to evaluate who I was and see if I fit their standards. The subtle warning in his voice made me curious about what lay ahead. I agreed to go not to impress anyone, but to understand the environment that had shaped the man I loved. We arrived at a massive, perfectly manicured property in an affluent neighborhood that practically screamed wealth. Preston parked the car and turned to me, warning me that his parents could be exceptionally difficult and particular. I gave him a calm nod, assuring him that I could manage the situation easily. Inside, the house felt cold, resembling a sterile museum rather than a welcoming family home where people actually lived. His mother, Victoria, greeted us with a stiff, calculated smile that lingered only on her lips, not her eyes. She scanned me instantly, evaluating my simple clothing and general posture before offering a polite but distant welcome. His father, Arthur, followed behind her with a serious, observant expression that suggested he was used to demanding respect. My name was introduced, but it seemed to hold very little significance in their grand living room. We gathered around a formal dining table, where the initial conversation consisted of safe, trivial topics. They asked about my commute and the local weather, keeping the dialogue superficial while they quietly measured my worth. The atmosphere shifted when Arthur leaned forward, asking me what exactly I did in the military. I replied simply that I was an officer, keeping my response as understated as possible to see their reaction. Arthur explained that there were many types of officers, and his tone implied that my role was likely minor. I mentioned that my duties involved administration, support, and operations, which seemed to satisfy their desire to categorize me. Victoria smiled tightly, commenting that such work must be highly stable and safe for a young woman. I let her comment stand without defending myself, noting how easily they chose to minimize my career. Preston did not seem to notice the condescension in his parents' words, or perhaps he was simply accustomed to their behavior. His lack of intervention was disappointing, revealing how deeply he accepted their superiority. Throughout the main course, they continued making polite, passive-aggressive remarks about my lifestyle. It became clear that they viewed me as an underachieving partner who was lucky to have captured the attention of their son. Arthur then began speaking about his own philosophy on leadership, asserting that true responsibility is rarely encountered early in life. He suggested that true authority belongs to a select few who have proven themselves over decades. I nodded politely and agreed that leadership is indeed a rare quality. I chose to stay quiet, realizing that some people are too blinded by their own pride to notice who is sitting right across from them. The quiet rhythm of the dinner was interrupted when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I looked down and saw a contact name that demanded my immediate attention, even in the middle of a family dinner. I excused myself from the table and stepped into the nearby hallway to answer the urgent call. I spoke softly, confirming that I was listening, ready to receive whatever news was about to come. A voice on the other end requested my final authorization on a massive naval fleet deployment that was highly time-sensitive. I promised the caller that I would review the strategic logistics tonight and make my decision immediately. The person on the line thanked me, addressing me as Admiral before hanging up. I did not realize that my quiet response had traveled back into the dining room, but the damage was already done. When I returned to the table, The atmosphere had transformed completely. The air was thick with sudden tension, and Preston looked at me with wide, completely bewildered eyes. His father was sitting up much straighter, suddenly showing a level of focus that had been completely absent earlier. His mother sat in stunned silence, her face pale as she tried to process the title she had just overheard. Preston spoke first, quietly pointing out that I had never mentioned holding such an incredibly high rank. I replied calmly that no one had ever asked me about my specific rank during our conversations. A heavy silence settled over us, the kind of silence that forces people to examine their own biases. Arthur cleared his throat, admitting that commanding an operation was a massive responsibility that commanded deep respect. Suddenly, the condescending remarks ceased, and they began treating me with an almost submissive level of politeness. Every question they asked was now carefully phrased, and they listened to my answers with genuine interest. The shift was dramatic, but it did not make me feel proud or vindicated. Instead, it only confirmed the sad truth about how they viewed the world and the people in it. When we finally walked out of the house, the cool night air felt clean and liberating compared to the suffocating dinner table. Preston walked beside me, his steps hesitant and quiet as he tried to process what had just happened. He admitted that he had no idea about my actual standing in the military, and his voice sounded distant, almost as if he were speaking to a stranger. I told him that I had deliberately kept my rank quiet because I wanted to see how he and his family would treat me without it. He stared at me in silence, slowly realizing the depth of the test he had unknowingly failed. He tried to defend his parents, claiming they did not mean any harm by their behavior. I looked at him, knowing that their lack of conscious malice made the behavior even worse. We rode home in a silence that felt heavier than any storm, both of us realizing that some gaps could never be bridged. I understood then that respect should never be a commodity reserved only for those with power or high status. True character is revealed by how we treat those we believe are beneath us, and that night, the answer had been made perfectly clear.